Hi everyone, welcome to Ask a Property Manager episode 38. Today is September 16th, 2020. Coming to you from Studio 2.0 here at Own Buffalo. I'm Andrew Schultz, Principal Broker of Own Buffalo Inc. And on today's show, we're going to be taking a look at a surge in mortgage demand, as well as taking a glimpse at the commercial real estate market, and finally answering some questions from landlords around the country. Before we jump into that, let's do a quick plug on our social media. New episodes of Ask a Property Manager drop every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern on Facebook. You can watch those live on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Buffalo Foreclosed Homes. We also post the replay on Facebook as well as our YouTube page, youtube.com/Own Buffalo. Don't forget to check out our Instagram over at instagram.com/Own Buffalo. We obviously post a little bit different content there, a little bit more behind the scenes stuff than what you would see on Facebook or YouTube. And last but not least, don't forget that you can grab a free 30-minute consultation, either a Zoom call or a phone call over at ownbuffalo.com as well. As you can see, I do have a couple of time slots open for Friday of this week, and then next week we have a few time slots open as well. So definitely be sure to take advantage of that. Don't forget, new episodes of the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast drop every Thursday in the morning. You can catch that anywhere that podcasts are heard or over at rentprep.com/podcast. New episode drops tomorrow. We're going to be looking at the worst landlord in all of New York City, how to handle a falsified employment reference, and a whole bunch more. So don't forget to check that out over at rentprep.com/podcast or anywhere podcasts are heard. We are going to jump right into our news articles here this morning. And these first two come out of CNBC. First one here is in relation to mortgage demand. Mortgage demand surges by more than 40% from a year ago amid house buying spree and low interest rates. And we'll get into this a little bit more here. I'm going to read most of this article. It's a pretty short one. And then we'll talk a little bit more about how it looks here locally. This was published September 9th, which was not that long ago, last week. The end of August usually marks the beginning of the slow season for housing, but as with everything else, this year's trends are like none other. Mortgage applications to purchase a home rose 3% last week from the previous week and were a stunning 40% higher from a year ago. That's a pretty huge statistic, according to Mortgage Bankers Association's seasonally adjusted index. The year-on-year comparison is usually in the single digits. So when you're talking about a difference of 1 to 9% versus 40%, there's a pretty substantial difference there. While the figure may have been skewed slightly by the Labor Day holiday, which fell earlier last year, purchase demand is still running significantly higher than a year ago. Buyers are still getting significant incentive from low mortgage rates. The average contract interest rate for a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage with conforming loan balances up to $510,000 fell to 3.07% for loans with a 20% down payment. For the 15-year fixed-rate mortgage, rate declined to a record low of 2.62% on conventional loans. That's incredibly low. There continues to be a resiliency in the purchase market, said Joel Kahn, an MBA economist. The average loan size continued to increase, hitting a survey high of $368,600, highlighting the strong overall demand for buying a home. Conventional, VA, and FHA purchase applications all increased in the past week. So we're seeing that there's actually an increase in mortgage applications across all products, essentially. It's not just conventional products, it's conventional, FHA, and VA products are all seeing an uptick in looking for mortgages here. Applications to refinance a home rose 3% for the week and were 60% higher than a year ago. Again, refinancing's been huge for a few months now, partially as a result of the pandemic and partially just as a result of historically low interest rates. Refinance volume has been extremely high since the rates plummeted last March. There you go. But the pool of borrowers who haven't already taken advantage of these low rates is shrinking, which was the next point I was going to mention. Most people who have refinanced are already through that process, which is probably good for them because, as we covered a couple of weeks ago, there's now a new fee when you go to refinance if you're taking on a, I think it was for FHA products. I'd have to double check. It might have been conventionals as well, but now there's a new fee that you're going to wind up paying when you go to refinance. Which sucks, but it kind of is what it is. They're trying to mitigate a future loss down the road with the inevitable foreclosures and things like that we'll see. The refinance share of mortgage activity increased to 63.1 of total applications from 62.5 the previous week. The adjustable rate mortgage share of activity decreased to 2.2 total percent of applications. So the refinance share of mortgage activity increased to 63.1. I think that what they're talking about there is refinance mortgages versus initial mortgages being 63.5 to whatever the converse would be to that. So that's essentially just saying that there's more refinance activity in the market than there is origination activity, if you will. So that's kind of an interesting article. In terms of what we're seeing for mortgage demand here in Western New York, it's definitely high because the market is on fire. If you're a seller, it's a great spot to be. If you're a buyer, it's a very big challenge right now because a lot of properties are selling over asking price with multiple offers, and things can get a little bit crazy out there. So there's definitely going to be a higher demand for mortgages, especially because people are in buy mode right now, despite being in the middle of a global pandemic. So that is pretty interesting. It's good information to see. I think that this will breed a lot of confidence in the real estate market going forward before we start to see things. Hopefully we don't see a wave of foreclosures, but pretty much inevitable that we will see a wave of foreclosures sometime in the near future. Let's jump over to this article, again published by CNBC. Landlords offer stores pandemic-related escape clauses. This is an article geared more towards the commercial landlord-tenant relationship. And we're actually going to read the more nationalized article, and then I have two different articles from local commercial real estate interests that I think will help to kind of put this in context for what it means for the local Buffalo market here. We're not going to read this entire article as it is incredibly long. It's available on CNBC if you want to take a look at it. New pandemic escape clauses are making their way into retail leases as the coronavirus and long-term economic trends continue to batter the industry, according to retail brokers, attorneys, and retail analysts. Recently, commercial retailers and landlords have started adjusting lease terms to include rent payments that correlate with the retailer's open capacity. For instance, if a restaurant's operating at 50% capacity, it's only obligated to pay 50% of its rent. For some leases in high-traffic commercial hubs, landlords are conceding to earlier lease termination agreements if occupancy falls below a certain percentage in the area. Other landlords are offering to defer rent and lengthen the lease term to make up for the lost rent at the back end of the contract. It's actually pretty similar to something that we were doing on the residential side. Let me scroll down through here. The firm forecasts the retail sector will see 46 million square foot in new vacancy in 2020, which amounts to a vacancy rate of about 12%, and an additional 11 million square foot in vacancy in 2021. It estimates effective rents will decline by about 11% by the end of 2020. And this is coming out of Moody's Analytics, which is a major analytics firm that looks into a variety of different things, but specifically here they're looking at commercial real estate. And this is a report from July, so it's not as though this is incredibly dated information or anything like that. This is relatively current. I mean, we're now in September. I don't know how frequently they release these reports, but I would assume if it's a quarterly thing, we'll see another one here shortly, which might be a little bit more revealing as to what's going on in the commercial real estate market, the commercial landlord-tenant real estate world right now. Definitely interesting to be watching something like this. And I don't think that this is a huge shock to anyone. I think that there's been a long-term shift to online retailers and things like that. You know, when you're talking about putting people into commercial storefronts, there's, you know, if you're not a big box retailer, and even big box retailers are suffering in a massive way, which we'll get into here in a minute. But if you're not a big box retailer, sometimes it just doesn't make sense to take on a massive storefront like what you would see in a mall or something like that and commit yourself to that massive, massive debt load. So let's move this a little bit more local. This comes out of Buffalo Business First. This is a little bit older of an article from August 18th, but it's talking about the Walden Galleria, which is basically the main mall in Western New York as of right now. It's gone through some extensive renovations over the last, I'm going to say, 5-ish years. They've added a huge expansion onto it, a lot more dining options and things like that. This article, again, from August 18th out of Buffalo Business First, titled "Lawsuits Contend Victoria's Secret Hasn't Paid Walden Galleria Rent Since March." In a pair of new lawsuits, the company that leases space in Walden Galleria said Victoria's Secret and its Pink store have not made rent payments since March. The stores are owned by Columbus, Ohio-based L Brands. Lawsuits were filed August 14th in Erie County Supreme Court by Pyramid Management Group, the mall's management agent for Pyramid Walden Co. LP. According to court documents, the stores made partial payments in July after Pyramid sent a notice, but still collectively owed $338,282 as of July 31st. Pyramid sent final notices of default at the end of the month as well. Per month, the lease for the main store was $60,367 and $38,283 for Pink. Those are big numbers. I understand that these stores are turning, a fair amount of revenue and things like that, but when you're talking about a number like that, and keep in mind, we're talking about Victoria's Secret and we're talking about Pink, which are both L brands, and I think there's another one that I can't recall off the top of my head that's also tied into L brands. But these are not single site operators. These this L brands, they have these locations in probably most malls across the country, and I would think that they have pretty significant international location as well. It's a big sum. Like, we're talking about $340,000 for one mall for 2 stores. Now multiply that however many mall locations they have across the country, across the world, and you can see how this is a huge ballooning impact on commercial real estate. Victoria's Secret in 2013 extended its lease for the main 12,000 square foot store to January 31st, 2024. The lease for Pink's 6,271 square foot store runs through the same date. Both lawsuits were filed by Pyramid's attorney. The COVID-19 pandemic has been rough on some retailers, particularly with the closure of malls, which have since reopened in New York. L Brands said in July it was prepared to cut 50% of its corporate jobs, which followed an announcement in May that it would permanently close 250 Victoria's Secret and Pink stores. The company also stated it would look at other measures to trim costs, such as reducing inventory, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to move on to another article. This comes out of the Buffalo News, and it's a little bit more recent. This one is September 2nd, titled Walden Galleria Woes, Pandemic Shakes Western New York's Strongest Mall. I'm not going to, again, read through all of this article, but there are some interesting things in here that I wanted to point out. And again, this is all related to the Walden Galleria. I'm not picking out the Walden Galleria, but I'm using them as an example because it's an example that if you're in the Buffalo market, you can certainly understand it because you know the Walden Galleria. If you're not in the Buffalo market, I'm sure you know of a mall in your neck of the woods that's going through this exact same type of a situation. Let's see. The Galleria no longer enjoys such distinction. One of its anchor stores, Lord & Taylor, is closing as the high-end retailer is going out of business. Scroll down a little bit here. An important component of the Walden Galleria's survival strategy is its Eat Shop Play business model. This was the big push when they did all of their renovation a few years back. They wanted this to be a not just a shopping destination. They wanted people to come here to eat. They wanted people to come here to, shop. They wanted people to come here to do things. The Galleria has Dave & Buster's, we'll get into that, the Regal, things like that nature. It's meant to be a destination mall, not just a come and grab, your t-shirt and get on with your day. Popular children's entertainment complex Billy B's has not yet been allowed to reopen, and neither has bar and arcade Dave & Buster's. With the movie theaters still closed, the mall's Regal Cinema also remains dark. When officials close the border to recreational traffic in order to curb the spread of the virus, Canadian shoppers also disappeared overnight. The Galleria counts on Canadian shoppers for an important portion of its sales. That's super relevant. The border is still closed between the United States and Canada, and we do get a fair amount of Canadians that'll come over to do a variety of shopping, both at the Galleria and then also at the Outlet Mall up in Niagara Falls. So with that border still being closed, there is a significant portion of sales that would be missing from the Galleria, despite the fact that it has reopened. Let's see here. We'll scroll down a little bit. Shoppers still reluctant. This is something that's worth pointing out. With positive test rates for COVID ticking higher in Western New York, many shoppers are still staying away, relying instead on online shopping and curbside pickup. Talked about that a minute ago. One food court tenant said they've done less than 1/3 of the business that they normally would in a month. Nationally, over the past 7 months, clothing and shoe store sales were down 36.5%, while department store sales, such as those at Macy's, JCPenney, were down 18.5%, according to U.S. Census Bureau. Online and mail order sales were up 19.8% over the same period. We're seeing that shift, and this is really kind of forcing the shift in a big way, a lot faster than it may have happened otherwise. New York State's COVID reopening schedule left malls closed during all 4 phases with another blow. As freestanding stores, restaurants, and salons were given permission to reopen across Western New York, those inside the Walden Galleria and other malls were left on the sidelines. When malls were given the okay to reopen, they were first required to invest in new heating and cooling filters. By that time, tenants had lost months' worth of business. That was a big issue because a lot of the heating and cooling systems had to be updated to meet new standards, which obviously took time. There's obviously a shortage on labor currently. There's also a shortage on supplies. The supply chains are interrupted. So that took longer than anticipated. It's just blow after blow after blow. Even as the Galleria seeks more favorable terms with its own lenders, the tenants say the mall refuses to negotiate leases to provide its similarly hard-hit tenants with relief. A Burger King franchisee understands his legal obligation to pay rent, especially since the mall is also in a difficult situation, but he believes there is a middle ground that could help relieve some of the pressure that's been put on tenants through no fault of their own. The mall could appeal to local government for real estate tax relief, of which the tenants pay a portion, he said. Common area maintenance charges, CAM, could be eliminated since the need for maintenance was drastically reduced throughout the closure. And Camilleri was... I hope I pronounced that right. M. Camilleri was unaware of any advertising efforts that took place during the closure, so advertising fees seem unfair as well, he said. So essentially what he's talking about here is a reduction in common area maintenance since there was no one in the mall. Obviously, they didn't necessarily need to have people running around and cleaning and mopping and sweeping and everything. There was still ongoing maintenance work that had to be done. It's not like they just throw a switch and turn the building off. But there was definitely a reduction in the amount of number one, the amount of staff and the amount of work that needed to be done. Mentioning the advertising, a lot of times when you are in a mall or something like that, they will do advertising for the mall as a destination and include you as a retailer, and you'll be responsible for some portion of that advertising cost, which is what they're referencing here. Let's see. The Walden Galleria filed lawsuits last month against national retailers Victoria's Secret, Pink, and Bath & Body Works. That was the other L brand that I couldn't remember. For back rent totaling $500,000. So there you go. When you add in the back rent on Bath & Body Works, the rent total increases even more. And again, take that and extrapolate it out against however many different mall locations or just locations in general that these places have stores. You can see how this is a big ballooning impact on larger retailers. 15 vacant storefronts. Since the pandemic, the Made in America stores closed, as have Joseph A. Bank, Justice, Arby's, Bravo, Celino Plumbing, and local favorite Sunshine and Bluebirds. Other stores such as Gap, Alex and Ani, Lids, Dough Life, and Cultured Homes still have not reopened. The mall will also lose the Microsoft Store and New York & Company when their corporations close all B&M locations, as they've announced they will. Let's see here. Satique, I don't know if I pronounced that right. Tim Hortons, Parkside Candy, Hot Topic, and Perfume Stop have reopened, but were closed for at least part of the day during regular business hours last week. A Hot Topic worker said that the store closes for employee breaks and lunch because of a shortage of workers. A note on the entrance to Aeropostale said that the store was closed for similar staffing issues. That was a massive no-no prior to the pandemic. Malls are very, very stringent on their business hours, and you need to be open from the minute the mall is open until the minute the mall closes in just about every instance. I've never really seen at the Walden Galleria stores that are closed in the middle of the day. If you go over to Eastern Hills Mall, which is basically a ghost town, very different set of circumstances. Let's see here. Pyramid notes, previously announced openings are still on track. Canadian fashion brand Ardeen, Mandati Jewelers, and Fresh Healthy Cafe are set for this week. Trampoline Park Urban Air is slated to open at the end of this month as long as the governor gives businesses of its kind permission to reopen. The highly anticipated Lego store is scheduled to open October 2nd, the same day as Earthbound Trading Company. And Santora's Pizza and Pub, that's a local place, is destined for the mall's Restaurant Row on November 1st. In August, word came out that Pyramid Management Group was in danger of defaulting on the mall's $247.5 million commercial mortgage, which is now in special servicing. The mall is suing tenants for hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid back rent. It's losing giant anchor Lord & Taylor, which is in liquidation. Another two-floor anchor, JCPenney, is in bankrupt with plans to close 200 stores, and now the mall has shortened its hours. TREP data reveals that about 17.4% of CMBS commercial mortgage-backed security loans were 30 or more days delinquent as of August 26, more than double the previous record high of 8.14% during the Great Recession. So I think that's all I was mentioning on that article. You can really see that this is having a huge impact, a deep impact on the commercial real estate market, both as the landlord and as the tenant. It's very understandable that tenants don't want to have to pay rent for a period of time when their stores were not able to be open. And it's understandable that the landlords need that rent in order to continue to operate, because they still have expenses of maintaining the building. They still have expenses of paying the bills and, all of the other things, the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance. There's a lot that goes into these operations. And, it's unfortunate that we're in the position that we're in, where we're starting to see a lot of brick and mortars close. I think this one will probably get worse before it gets better, unfortunately. Through no fault of a lot of these retailers, and it's just kind of the nature of the beast. So if you're able to get out and shop local, support your local businesses whenever possible, do everything you can to help keep your local community strong. Let's move into questions from landlords around the country. We're going to start with this one. Buyer's still in a home after closing. So we're closing on a house tomorrow. It needs work before we can put it up for rent. I was hoping to get someone in by November 1st since no one wants to move during the winter. But from the looks of it, the people that we're buying from won't be out by closing. What is the time frame that they're allowed after closing, and what is your opinion and suggestions? I'm not sure what market you're in. I did not see that on the post anywhere, unfortunately. But here in Western New York, the seller is expected to be out of the property at the time of closing. You can negotiate a lease back or something like that as part of the closing if they need some time because they're waiting on a property that they're moving into to close, for instance. You might have a few days of lease back or something like that. Or if it's a commercial transaction, you might sell the actual physical asset, but which was owned by the company that occupies the building, but they want to continue to stay in the building. You may have somebody else that owns the real estate, and then the previous occupant who did own the building just becomes a leaseholder, something like that kind of a scenario. But that would all be negotiated prior to closing. In terms of how long somebody is allowed to stay in a property post closing, check your contract and talk to your attorney. If you're in an attorney-closed state, find out what's going on there. But anything like that should be negotiated well before the closing. So hopefully you're able to get that squared away prior to closing on that property. Exterior door replacement. Any door gurus here looking for some guidance? I need to replace an exterior front entry door to an apartment building because the existing wood door has expanded over the years and gets stuck. I'm looking to replace with the door that can withstand moisture/snow and other elements. Secure, sturdy material. I don't want glass or easily breakable material near the door lock to hopefully prevent break-ins, and you want it to look decent, not just a plain slab of metal. What materials are best for the door? I'm going to stop reading through this. I think we can kind of get the point here. Honestly, I don't know, as though I obviously haven't seen the door, but it doesn't sound like the door needs replacement. It sounds like the door needs adjustment. I would check and see if the first thing I would probably check would be the hinges. Make sure that all of your hinges are nice and tight, and if they're not, tighten those up. What you may find is over time, especially with a heavy wooden door, the hinges will start to pull away from the frame a little bit. If you can unhook that frame, a trick that one of our vendors had taught me is to get the hole tight again so that you can screw it back in there and get your hinge to actually hold properly. Fill the hole with wooden toothpicks, really cram them in there, and then break them off at surface level. Screw into the toothpicks, which will then push those out into the actual wood of the door frame itself, and hopefully you'll get a little bit tighter connection there. So that's a little bit of a cheat you can use to tighten up a hinge that maybe is stripped out or something like that. The other thing you can do is, it's a wooden door, by the sounds of things, you can probably plane the door so that it's not rubbing or hitting wherever it's rubbing or hitting. And then you can continue to use the existing wooden door. It doesn't sound to me as though you necessarily have to replace this door. I would probably look into this a little bit further and see if this is something that can be handled as a repair, unless you're really truly hell-bent on replacing the door, in which case, more power to you. Spending $2,500 on a door for a rental property is insane, especially for a 36 by 80 door. That's not an uncommon sized door. It's a little bit, it's for an exterior door. That's not an uncommon size. $2,500. I'm sorry, 2.2 to 5.5. yeah, no, don't spend that much on unless you're leasing $1 million properties or something like that. I don't see any reason to be spending anywhere near $2,000 on an exterior door. Just my opinion. Fix what you've got. If you don't necessarily need to replace it, and then if you do want to replace it, just find something that's appropriate for what you're looking to do. But you shouldn't be spending anywhere near that level of money. Kitchen sinks. Do tenants overall prefer a large single sink or a split sink? There are a couple different things to think about here. The first thing that I would think about would be, do you have a dishwasher? And if you don't have a dishwasher, I would automatically start leaning toward a 2-bay sink so that you can wash and rinse. If you do have a dishwasher, then maybe you might want to consider a single bay. What do you have room for? And I say this, you have to check two different ways. I mean, how much room do you have for countertop? If you put a bigger double bay sink in, is it going to take away from countertop space that you desperately need? Or do you have plenty of countertop space? The other thing you're going to want to look at is look underneath where the sink is going to go. How much room do you have in terms of depth? Do you have anything that's going to, any sort of a support or anything that's going to obstruct the installation of the sink? Stuff to consider. So definitely take a look at stuff like that. I personally always prefer a 2-bay split sink. The deeper the better. A small 2-bay sink, if it's not that deep, is not as good as a large 1-bay. Because you can't use it. You can't wash a pan in it if it's not deep enough to hold a pan. So a deeper 2-bay sink followed by a deeper 1-bay sink would probably be the way that I would go. That's kind of the way that we would look at it. I don't know of too many tenants who, have a real deep preference for what type of kitchen sink that they have. But if you're doing an upgrade, I always prefer a 2-bay sink over a single-bay sink. Unmarried applicants. Hello, fellow landlords. Looking for some advice about an applicant. I showed her the property today and she wants to move forward. She meets my pre-screening qualifications, a little bit low on the credit score of 590, meets the income requirement of 3 times, but only if you add together both her and her boyfriend's income. They both make $40,000 a year and the requirement is 52. It concerns me that they're not married because he could leave and she doesn't make enough money on her own to qualify. What are your thoughts? How is this reflected in the lease? Should they both be added or just her? Thank you so much for all your help and advice. So there's a couple things that I would do here. First things first, both of them should have applications in, not just her. Every person over the age of 18 should be filling out an application if they're going to be living in your property, and you should be doing your due diligence on every person that applies for your property. So I'll start there. Get an application from the boyfriend so you understand what they're both dealing with, because it doesn't sound like you've got a full application package here as of right now. Keep in mind that tenant screening is a snapshot in time. The fact that they're not married doesn't bother me in the slightest. We place dating couples, we place, friends, we place all kinds of different people into apartments that are living together that aren't married. Married couples are no more or less stable than unmarried couples, in my honest opinion. Married couples get divorced just as often as unmarried couples break up. Married couples, last I knew, the divorce rate was 50% and climbing. So it's not as though a married couple is necessarily more stable than a dating couple. In fact, it's probably more, difficult for a married couple when it's time for them to split up than an unmarried couple, just because there's going to be, combined finances and things like that. It's a little bit more complicated for a married couple. So the marriage thing is completely irrelevant to me. I wouldn't even really consider that. I would probably be more concerned with the 590 credit score. Take a look at all the items on the credit score and see what it is that's dragging that down. Are they not paying consumer debt? That's a question mark. Is it medical debt? All right, that's a little bit different scenario, something like that. So that would be my concern more than the unmarried and more than the income would be the credit score. As far as how to reflect it on the lease, both parties should be named as responsible parties on the lease. So they should be on your, page 1 of your lease as the responsible parties. They should both be signing the lease, acknowledging that they are a party to the lease, and make sure that your lease also contains a clause that names both tenants both jointly and severally liable for that lease for the entire duration of it. So if they do split up and one of them moves out of the house, both of them are still responsible for that lease. So that's definitely something you want to make sure you have written into your lease. Talk to an attorney if you're not sure how to word something like that. Actually talk to an attorney regardless. Make sure that you have somebody review your lease before you have a tenant sign off on it, just so you understand what you're doing and you're not putting yourself into a position where there's something in your lease that violates a local statute or something silly like that. So that's my thought on that. If they screen out fine, I would get the application package from the other half and screen it like you would any other tenant and combine the incomes and go from there. So you may find that he has even better credit than she does. Or you may find that there's really something that, pops up in his background that leads you to not want to rent to either one of them. So that's my thoughts on that. That pretty much wraps things up for today. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. We love producing Ask a Property Manager, and you can help us to improve by dropping a question in the comments either on Facebook or on YouTube, and your question may be picked up and answered in an upcoming episode. If you enjoyed this content, or if I brought some value to your day, do me a favor and hit the thumbs up button. YouTube and Facebook both push videos based on community feedback, so every like, comment, subscribe, and share helps us to grow and reach more people, which is super important to us. Next week's episode will be on September 23rd at 10 a.m. Eastern. We'll be back with another show you won't want to miss. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.